A couple of weeks ago, my wife and myself had the good fortune to attend a lecture in Melbourne by the noted lawyer and human rights advocate Julian Burnside. Here's an extract from his book, Watching Brief: Reflections on Human Rights, Law and Justice. It's about the famous Dreyfus case. I'm Kim Dodsworth, Queensland storyteller. In November 1894, a young French artillery officer of Jewish origin, Captain Alfred Dreyfus, was sentenced to life imprisonment for allegedly having communicated French military secrets to the German embassy in Paris. Dreyfus was sent to the penal colony at Devil's Island in French Guiana. There he was placed in solitary confinement, where he was to spend almost 5 years. Ultimately, it was to be proven beyond all doubt that Dreyfus was entirely innocent and the victim of a grave miscarriage of justice perpetrated at the highest levels of the French military. On the 13th of January 1898, the Paris newspaper L'Aurore, which in French means dawn or daybreak, published a letter to the President of the Republic of France written by Émile Zola, the great French writer. Under the headline, J'accuse, or I accuse, Zola wrote, "I accuse General Mercier of having made himself an accomplice of one of the greatest crimes of history. I accuse General Billot of having in his hands decisive proof of the innocence of Dreyfus and of having concealed them. I accuse the judges of the Dreyfus court-martial of having violated all human rights in condemning a prisoner on testimony kept secret from him." J'accuse identified the lines of battle in French society: the power of the military versus the rights of the individual, the dominance of the Republic versus the dominance of the Church, Christianity versus, quote-unquote, the Jewish conspiracy. The article provoked anti-Semitic rioting throughout France, but it also provoked a growing concern about Dreyfus's trial, which ultimately led to a retrial. What is the background to this case which polarized the entire French nation? On the 26th September 1894, the French intelligence service intercepted a message that had been sent to Lieutenant Colonel von Schwarzkoppen. This document, later known universally as the bordereau, showed that someone on the general staff of the French army had leaked important military secrets to the Germans. An analysis of the document's contents suggested that the author must be an artillery officer who had also spent time in 4 other sections of the army. Colonel Sandher, the head of the statistical section, was asked to investigate the matter. He examined a list of artillery officers to see whether any fitted the profile, and lighted on the name of Captain Alfred Dreyfus, an artillery officer and a member of the Army's General Staff. Sandher was openly anti-Semitic. He noted that Dreyfus was a Jew and did not consider any further possible suspects. He reported to the Minister of War, General Mercier, that he had identified the spy in the army ranks. A sample of Dreyfus's handwriting was shown to a self-styled handwriting expert, Alphonse Bertillon. Knowing in advance that the army wanted Dreyfus's writing to correspond with that in the bordereau, Bertillon obliged. The court-martial of Dreyfus took place from the 19th to the 22nd of December 1894. Dreyfus was well represented. His counsel asked that the court-martial be held in public, but the request was refused. Even so, General Mercier was told that the prosecution was not going well, and the judges appeared to be hesitant about Dreyfus's guilt. Accordingly, he instructed that the judges be provided with a secret dossier and that they be told that it was essential for national security that the existence of the dossier not be disclosed either to Dreyfus or his counsel. The dossier included documents forged by one of Mercier's underlings, Major Henry. These documents convinced the judges that Dreyfus was indeed guilty. After being publicly humiliated and stripped of his rank, Dreyfus was sent to Devil's Island, where he was held in solitary confinement. The guards there were forbidden to speak to him. In the meantime, Dreyfus's wife Lucy and his brother Mathieu had been attempting to convene an inquiry into the original conviction. Largely because of Mathieu's efforts, the original bordereau was published in a newspaper on the 11th of November 1897, where it was seen by Monsieur de Castro, a South American stockbroker. Remarkably, de Castro recognized the handwriting of the bordereau as being that of one of his clients, a Major Wilson Esterhazy. He contacted Mathieu Dreyfus, and the campaign then developed a head of steam. Wilson Esterhazy was tried by court-martial, but astonishingly, he was acquitted despite all the evidence against him. By now, the Zola letter had been published, and grave doubts had arisen about the legality of the Dreyfus trial. Then, on the 30th of August 1898, Major Henry confessed his perjury in the Dreyfus case and his falsification of the secret dossier. He was imprisoned and committed suicide while awaiting trial. A year later, Dreyfus's second trial took place. It was held at Rennes in Brittany in order to avoid the passionate atmosphere of a trial in Paris. It's a measure of the level of anti-Semitism prevalent in French society at the end of the 19th century that Dreyfus was again convicted by a 5-2 majority, notwithstanding Henry's confession. This time, though, he was found guilty of treason with extenuating circumstances, which seems a logical absurdity. Just 10 days later, on the 19th of September 1899, the President of France signed a pardon. Dreyfus accepted the pardon, but only on the condition that he was entitled to continue to pursue a campaign to demonstrate his innocence. A pardon, after all, proceeds from an assumption of guilt. 6 years later, on the 12th of July 1906, after yet another inquiry, the three chambers of the Supreme Court of Appeal sat jointly and annulled the verdict of the second trial and finally proclaimed Dreyfus innocent. He was subsequently reinstated in the French army. Notwithstanding all that had gone before, the parliamentary vote on the question of the reinstatement was not unanimous. The Chamber of Deputies voted 432 to 32. In the Senate, the vote was 182 to 30. Dreyfus saw active service in World War I and died in 1935. It was not until September 1995 that the French army finally admitted publicly that Dreyfus had been wrongly convicted. It had earlier refused a gift of a statue of Dreyfus offered by the Prime Minister Georges Pompidou. On the 100th anniversary of the publication of J'accuse, the French Parliament honoured Émile Zola's role in the Dreyfus affair. President Jacques Chirac apologised on behalf of the nation to the families of Dreyfus and Zola. Nowadays, it's all too easy to look back on the Dreyfus affair with an air of superiority and imagine that what happened in France a century ago could not possibly happen in Australia today. Two things made the Dreyfus affair possible: a secret trial and the use of evidence concealed from the accused and his counsel, and racial or religious prejudice that ran so deep as to blind people to any concern about the quality of justice accorded to the accused. Anti-Semitism no longer exists in any significant measure in Australia, at least not in the virulent form that characterised France in the 19th century and, more generally, Western Europe in the first half of the 20th century. However, other groups are sufficiently unpopular that, for practical purposes, many Australians do not regard their rights as mattering. These unpopular groups include alleged paedophiles, alleged terrorists, Muslims, Aborigines, and people with mental disorders. This is not to say that the feeling against any of those groups runs as deep and strong as did anti-Semitism in France at the time of the Dreyfus affair, but it is nevertheless strong enough that a large number of people in our society do not regard the rights of certain groups as being important enough to deserve the same recognition or protection as others. And that was an extract from the book Watching Brief, Reflections on Human Rights, Law and Justice by Julian Burnside. I'm Kim Dodsworth, Queensland storyteller. I hope you'll join me again this time next week for more writing of quality.